All right, so here I want to just review some of the export options with animations. All right, so the idea is that if you have saved an animation, not so much in the dog waffle animation format, DWA, but rather saved it in a image sequence, you're fine, you probably know what you're doing there. Don't save it as JPEG, it's lossy. Save it as an image sequence that is not lossy, such as the Targa, TGA 24-bit, or PNG sequence. It's a little bit slower, but it works. What you can do is also save it as an AVI, and so with that there are several options. Before I go do that, I need to have an animation, and instead of recreating a new one, I'll just load one I saved earlier. And this one, I have a couple of different versions of the same animation. You can see it here. Windows now has a nice preview option. Certainly useful, although it doesn't always, in my case here, I don't know if that's a glitch in my graphic driver, but it doesn't always refresh to show the actual preview. See here, I can go from one image to the other and it's not changing until I actually click it. And then the play in the preview here is actually that selected video. But the initial preview here, the still image, may not necessarily be. So what we have here is a cityscape that I saved with the Lagarith, another one that I saved with Intel YUV, another one with XVID, and the reason I did that, I wanted to show some of the differences. So let's go and save. Let's reload this one here. This one here, Lagarith, is a lossless codec, but it is compressed. You can tell the size is about 442 megabytes, which is significantly more than the XVID. This one here was only 17 megabyte, but it has some interesting side effects when you compress with XVID. It is not lossless, and so sometimes you may get some slight artifacts, especially with crisp edges or sudden changes in contrast or fast movement, all sorts of things that might be a little bit distracting from what you're trying to achieve as a as a format that you can use to reload the image or the animation. I would recommend something like uncompressed, which is huge, though it's a very large file format, and then also of course Lagarith, because that one is fast and it is lossless. Now you see a little bit of roping here, and that's in the preview. That's because it's not the full size. So the preview is adding some artifacts too. I'm going to load this one in, and as you may have seen with the loading an AVI animation or an AVI video, you're going to see a preview of the frames, and you can go from the very first to the very last, or a subset of that. Right? So let's say you want to go here. You can't go beyond the last frame. You need to have at least one frame. And so here we'll select just the whole sequence and open that. So now it's loading all of these frames back into an animation in Howler. And once we have that, what I want to do is just discuss 2 or 3 of the export options, and where you want to be particularly careful or aware of some of the things that can happen. One thing I was looking for is, can I save this to an AVI format which YouTube will recognize? In other words, yes, YouTube can recognize AVI files, but it doesn't work with all of the codecs. And the last few times that I've saved an AVI file with the Lagarith codec, YouTube unfortunately did not know how to process that, so it doesn't seem to have the Lagarith codec. That's sad. I hope they fix that or change that in the future. So here's a shout out to YouTube, something they could do better. And in the meantime, what that prompted me to do is to save to other formats to see if I, first of all, I want to save it as as an animation on disk, or even just in memory, in RAM, if I have enough memory. And that allows me to quickly get back to it. Right? All you do is you click here and it restores that. If you have it saved as a DWA, same thing, you can save to DWA and basically save and stop talking. There you go. That's me. A .dwa, I can name it, it will do that for us, but it's also good to know. DWA dog waffle animation. It's essentially very similar to a memory dump and RGB channels in parallel or in sequence, I don't know, but it's kind of similar. In file size, it's very much the same as a AVI in uncompressed format. So it's a very large file. And if we look at the files we have here, there is this file that's a 1 gigabyte file now, right? And that's the amount of memory it's probably taking in RAM, right? In fact, if I use the the task manager and I look at the dog waffle, it's even 2 gigabytes in size. And why is that? Well, because I have stored this one in memory, and I still have the animation itself here as well, right? So that's 2 times 1 gigabyte. I have 2 gigabytes of memory loaded here, and that's pretty big. So one thing I'm going to do to ease things up a little bit, I'm going to dump this one and store. We have the stored copy. I can go and open that and simply go free the old one, and then there it is, reload this. So this is a quick way to do it, especially if you have a fast drive, a well organized drive that doesn't clutter much, and also a fast spinning one, 10,000 RPM, at least 7,200 RPM, or of course nowadays SSD, solid state drives. Those are going to allow you to do much faster I/O. And the other options I wanted to explore is the codec to use when you save to AVI. All right, so when I save to AVI, I may want to know up front what codecs are available. Click on the save option, right? Because here you don't see it yet. If you change the path, if you say where you want it and what sort of name you want to give it, you're not going to have that option quite yet. So what you do here on the save AVI, it's then taking you to the path of no return. And when you click OK, it's starting to compress it or to encode it or to do whatever these compressors allow, these codecs. And if you have the Lagarith lossless codec, you have been paying attention. This is the one I recommend. It's free. It's from Sir Lags-a-lot, and it's a great free and I think open source, but definitely free. Yeah, I think it is in open source. And it's a great compression codec. It's fast, it's multi-threaded, it's RGB alpha aware. Now we don't save the alpha in our animations, but it is a very powerful codec, and it's lossless. That's the key thing, is that really you can use it for archival, and as long as you have a way to restore that codec somewhere else later, if you need to de-archive it, you do have the ability to use that as a compressed, very small file size by comparison with the big original uncompressed file. And you have that too here. So if you have a fast disk drive and you don't have any concern about how big the file is, go and save it as full frames. That will be fairly usable too. The thing I wanted to see is, what if I wanted to save it to a format that is good quality, but also recognized by YouTube, so I can actually show a small little AVI directly, uploading it as is without recompressing or converting it to a WMV or MP4 or anything like that. So one that's obviously quite tempting is the XVID, which is a free codec as well. And the XVID has a number of options. And when you configure it, you can see some presets for HD 720, HD 1080, and that does not necessarily set the dimension of the video, but rather the bitrate needed to comply with the bandwidth requirements. And so there is XVID mobile presets, and there's XVID, all of these, and then you can still also change the quantizer, the target quantizer, to something different, right? You can look at the bitrate that you're going to want here. So you say, oh, I need about 4,000, 8,000. Let's see what's 720. Probably easily can go to 8 to 6,000 kilobit per second. So 6 megabit per second. And that's where you can give it a better quality in the fine details. Right? But there are some other artifacts. And what I'm going to do is just save this here at about 4,000 or 5,000 kilobit per second. And it's a single pass. That's another thing too, is you may need to do a first and a second pass if you want an even better encoding. If you do a single pass, there's going to be some shortcomings, but we get what we pay for. I mean, if we want to make it fast and then also have it immediately go to YouTube and probably recognized that those are some of the options we choose. There are some other things like general purpose or some very specific like real-time encoding. There are other options here, and if you're the expert at it, these will make sense, especially for instance what sort of hardware requirements you want to request for that video to be decoded, right? On really old PCs or processors, you should still have MMX, but an extremely old computer will not have MMX, and so it won't be able to assist the decoding with even MMX or SSE. And SSE2. I remember the days of SSE2. That was about what 20 years ago or something like that when that came out. It was a big thing, and it keeps evolving. And new processors have new instruction sets, and the math kernel library MKL supports some of that, and some of that is 3D now and beyond. So you can do a lot of things here to make it very specific to a particular delivery configuration, hardware, software, chip-based capabilities, and that sort of things. Anyway, let's see what happens when we encode that. Right. So I'm going to go and save it to that, and it looks all good. If you look particularly in this area here on the right side, in the middle right side, it's very clean, it's very crisp. But then once it's been encoded, it may look different, but I want to particularly get your attention on one thing. It may look different in one video player, it may look non-different or better in another one, and that's a key thing to remember. Not only can things get screwed up by the encoding, but they can also be messed up by the viewer, the application. And let me show you an example. So here when I use show, it uses the default video player or media player, which is Windows Media Player, which is not the latest and greatest anymore. But you do see a little bit of noise here. So you had that swimming, right? And so I've had cases where it was even stronger, especially when I saved it as still the same codec, XVID, but with different configuration. Let's say I used the 720 single pass, and I use the target quantizer. If you go really high, it's a small file. If you go low, it's a bigger file. So I think the default here is 4, and I figured, oh, let's go with 4 and see what that does. So that's the default setting. I think everything else is default. Let's go save that. And you can see it takes a little while to encode it. It's not the absolute fastest thing. That depends on your PC. Mine's a really old one. You may have a much faster encoding with your hardware on that. It may even tap into perhaps some GPU acceleration and other things. Who knows? Lagarif is pretty good. I like Lagarif as in terms of the speed of its encoding, and it's multi-threaded. So if you have multiple cores available, it will use them. But let's take again. We've just saved this with the default settings for XVID and show it, right? And so one thing you want to notice again in the right section here, there's some amount of swimming happening that the original doesn't have, right? And there's other places where it's showing that. Now, the thing that's puzzling is that it will do that sometimes, but it's not in the actual video. It may actually be part of the encoder or the decoder in this case. So if I look at the videos that I have saved in those, here is a version that I saved in Lagarif. Let's go play that one. And that one's supposed to be lossless, so you won't see a lot of swimming or anything here. It's perfect. It looks really good. Now there is the occasional little flash or a little bit of noise. That's because I didn't give it enough anti-aliasing rendering passes, but it didn't lose any due to that saving, right? So it's still like an archive quality original. What you had is what you see again, what you have there. Now let's take a look at this one here. That one was with the YUV, one of the old codecs from Intel, and it has a little bit of noise here now. You can see lots of it too, actually. All right, and there seems to be similar stuff happening with XVID. Let's play the XVID here that I had saved a little bit earlier. Look at that, lots of swimming noise here. It comes, it goes. It seems to be dependent on the speed. Maybe it's a motion prediction interpolation or something estimation thing, but it's definitely noisy and disruptive. But the key thing that I want you to remember is that that's not always just in the file. In fact, the file may be good. It may be the viewer. So what I did is I right-clicked and I opened it with a different one, IrfanView. And IrfanView has a much cleaner play. Now it's lighter, it's a different tint. I don't know if that's the proper one, but look at how clean that is. So IrfanView certainly shows it differently. This is not only a function of what's in the file, it's also a function of what is being used or how it's being used in the file. Maybe IrfanView is not able to interpolate with the codec and it just shows each frame. Maybe something like that's going on. I don't know. But at any rate, what I want you to be aware of is that if you see it and it looks bad, don't necessarily conclude that the file is bad. It may be the fault of the player. Some playbacks, some tools that play back make certain shortcuts, have some assumptions. They may, crop some of the or reduce the depth of the red channel or the green or the blue and other things. And so it is always important, if you look at the file and you think it's broken, take a second opinion. Have a look at it with a different viewer, and you very likely have a number of viewers available. If you right click and choose open with, you may have a bunch of other tools available to view it, and some of them will do better than others. And if that's the case, that's probably indicating that the file may not be a total loss. Right? You may be able to recover it. And one thing you can certainly do is load such a video, such an AVI file back in here. Right? So remember this one here, for instance, in Howler, we saved it as a XVID. Where is it? Okay, and if I play it in here, and I look at it and say, oh gosh, look at this compression side effect here. It's really noisy. I wonder if I really want to post that to YouTube. Well, give it a try anyway, because it might be okay. And the way to find out is, well, what if you load it back in and you go to load AVI and you go to that same folder and you say, okay, here's that XVID that I had saved. Here's another one, right? And right click here just to play it and see, does it really look that bad? Oh yeah, look at that, there's a lot of noise here, a lot of swimming. Okay, and so if all that's happening, we'll want to see if it's actually doing that also after we reload it. Let's open that back into AVI, into Howler, and see if it still plays it the same way, or if we are actually seeing it cleaner that way. Right, so that will give you an idea of whether the file is actually usable. Right, so here we go. So now you can see it's totally restored. So there's something about the playback mechanism in some cases that you don't see in other cases. Good. So the good news is your file may look bad, but it probably is not that bad.